Hello and welcome to CommutePD, Professional Development for the Educator on the Move. This is a series of discussions focused on AI and education. And while technology is ever-changing, we'll delve into practical insights on the bigger questions beyond the latest features. Every season comes with resources to bring back to your classrooms to start your own conversations with peers, parents, and students. And you can always join the discussion at CommutePD.com. I'm your host, Kern Kelley, a 20-year educator at RSU 19 and coordinator of the main MDOE Student Ambassador Program. I'd like to welcome our panelists on today's show. We'll start with Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Davis, and I'm the Emerging Technology Specialist at the Maine Department of Education, and I'm also a 20-year educator in math and science and a little bit of all grade levels.
Dan?
My name is Dan Viles. I've worked at RSU 19 since 2005, secondary education. I've taught history classes, and I'm currently an English teacher. I've also taught in the AP for Me program for over a decade.
Kate.
And I'm Kate Meyer. I have been at Mount Desert Island High School as an English teacher and a design thinking teacher for 23 years, and I am currently the instructional innovation coach and an English teacher.
So we're going to talk today about AI in education, and we're going to cover the gamut. And if we miss anything, we're actually going to extend beyond today's episode. There's going to be 4 or 5 different episodes throughout this entire series. And so if we don't hit your question first thing, we will be able to get to that. And our first kind of thing we're going to talk about is some of the use cases that you guys as educators have seen in the classroom, some of your best use cases, some of your worst use cases, that kind of thing. What are some examples of ways that you guys have used it?
So for me, it's not necessarily the use of the tools, but how they're applying them. So thinking about analyzing the output. And once you've gotten an output, going through and saying, okay, this is what I want to use. This is what I don't want to use. This is what I should use. This is what I shouldn't use. So always being a part of that output and teaching students how to do that. Mm-hmm.
I've been really this year using it to improve my UDL principles in the design of my lessons and units and assessments. So I've been giving AI all of my work as I go through to really start improving access for students to the materials. And so that might be in how I communicate it, but it also could be in tools that I am teaching them how to use to teach them agency around accessing materials. I'm working with it to improve how students express themselves at the end and making sure that I'm always giving multiple options and multiple pathways for them to do that. And so that's really been improving my classroom practice a lot. I've been walking into my classroom knowing that I'm breaking down barriers for my students using this tool.
I've been more skeptical about using AI broadly with students, but I have found some specific use cases. I teach a class at a local library in which we have access to a lot of primary documents that were written in cursive handwriting from the mid 1800s, and I've used Google Gemini in order to kind of create a transcription from that cursive to a digital document that then my students can kind of closely edit. Gemini cannot or has not yet been able to get like 100% accurate on the transcription, but they can get you 85, 90% of the way there. And it's very easy for students to go and identify where the words are wrong and try to decode a few words of cursive writing and script rather than trying to do the whole thing, which would be really I hesitate to say impossible, but very difficult and extraordinarily time consuming.
One of the use cases that I've found has been really helpful, and this is a little more techy, I guess, but is we've used it to take a lot of our hardware we have in the school system. So, for example, our printers and make some RAG models. And those are basically locally sourced as far as our own school has them. They're not kind of on the internet, but people that only the information that they pulled from those manuals kind of go into it. So the idea is like a teacher could say, hey, how do I double side print and color this thing or whatever? And it would have a conversation back and forth with you to be able to help you do that. And that actually brings up, what are the models that we guys are using? So when we talk about models, large language models, as you guys know, there's many variations out there. There's many different brands right now. Do you guys have a favorite? What kind of things are you working with? What are you focusing on?
It's funny because
my favorite with students right now, and this has been a big shift from the past couple of years, is Magic School. That's the one I've been deploying mostly with my students. We'll branch out. We're going to do some AI image generation next week and use Adobe Firefly. We've been using Notebook LM through the Google Apps for Education workplace suite that we have. But I'm really finding Magic School to be really helpful to get my students using AI really quickly because of all the bots that are pre-programmed. And so they don't need to know prompting in depth to really get good output right away. So they can go in and just have a conversation with it that can be, it can just be really conversational. And they can get really good output from that. And I can see everything that they're doing. So I have access to all of their chats. When I first came back from being an MLTI ambassador, after ChatGPT had hit the scene, I was using ChatGPT with my students. And now I don't know that I would go back to doing that just because I can't see their chats.
Kate, you did that with a permission slip, right?
I did. I sent home permission slips to families for ChatGPT, let them know what we were doing. That's part of their terms of service. Users 13 to 18 must have explicit parental permission in order to be using ChatGPT.
Great. Yeah, well, it's important that we read all those terms of services. So in the butt, but also talking to your tech people at your school just to make sure it's safe. Kate talked about like having a tool like Magic School or even School AI where you can see those conversations. And that's all part of this too, is that being able to think ethically and responsibly, or even giving those tools to your kids so that they know how to ethically and responsibly think about it.
I think this is a great point. It's actually, it's part of my skepticism. It's part of my slow walk towards AI here, because I don't understand, and the degree to which I do understand it, it seems like, especially the LLMs, they're kind of a weird black box kind of technology where when I hear people who are designing them, they don't exactly even know how they work or why they do all the things they do on the output side. So, like, I think selecting tools that allow for greater transparency, allow for greater kind of security of student data, because they are minors and everything. Like, I think because ChatGPT was the first tool, perhaps broadly, that got really a lot of attention, it maybe pulled people towards these bigger models. Like, there are other ones that I'm aware of, like Claude and whatnot, but maybe is the one you're using, is this like more of a walled garden AI? Is it more of a restricted AI? Like, how does it do what it does to make it more safe for students?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is like a walled garden. That's a great way to describe it. So they do partner with those larger companies, but then they have built their own infrastructure for educators and students to work within. And so they are FERPA and COPA compliant. They will sign privacy data agreements with districts if districts need more than that. They work really hard. It's really interesting. So when students log in, they don't have to log in with their email. In fact, I don't think they can even log in with their email. They can log in. I tell them use your first name or use your first name and your last initial. And then a statement pops up for students every time they get into Magic Student that says, here's how we protect your privacy and data. Here's how to use this tool ethically, before the students are even released into the tool. And if personally identifying information gets in, because they also have the Magic School side, which is for educators. So if I'm using that as a professional and I accidentally put in some personally identifying information, they're monitoring on the back end and they're pulling that as they see that potentially come through. So not only do they not ask for it ever, so there's not really opportunity to put in if it happens to get in. And then none of your chat is going into training the larger model. Like, it really is that walled garden. And so everything is really safe in that tool. And because I'm using it a lot now, that's what I'm looking for in tools when I use them with students. I'm looking for things that are very safe. And they also, this is another issue that's coming up in conversation, which is the environmental impact. And so Magic School also has a statement about its partners and the environmental impact of its larger data centers and how carbon neutral they are and how much renewable energy they're using. So I'm starting to share that with students before we use it, because that's a concern my students have. And I'm hoping that other companies will start to follow suit and do that same kind of statement.
Another quick question on that, because like there's been some very high profile weirdness from some of the AI models, right? New York Times and other publishing reporters reporting out like it did this and it did that and it threatened this thing and then it wanted me to divorce somebody or whatever, right? All these weird things. Now, obviously, no one can have exhaustive use case knowledge of this, but you're seeing a lot of transcripts of your student use. Have you seen any weird reactions out of the AI in terms of the way it interacts with students?
Well, the great thing about that tool is that it refuses to interact with them on a weird level. So when I told them that it would flag anything that was a little iffy, and so Magic School will send a notification to me as the educator and say, hey, you want to go and check in on what Joe is saying, and it will tell you why. And a lot of times it's because Joe said crap. Or I taught a true crime class and they were using AI and it said kill a lot because we were studying a murder case. But the students also tried to break the machine, which is one thing Nicole and I encourage students and teachers to both do, which is what happens if you do this. And so, we tried to break it one day. And so students were asking it on a date. Will you go on a date with me? And it would flag it and send that to me, and it would say, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to help you get feedback on your essay. So again, those tools are built with really good safety guardrails.
So from your point of view, after having used some very customized for education AI tools, would it now steer you away from kind of a Wild West view of like, we have a lot of broad and super powerful AI tools, but maybe these are not appropriate at the secondary level or primary level, or elementary level, what have you? Like, does this, now that you've seen what a more customized educational AI looks like, does it make you not want to use the other tools with students?
Oh, because I'm like, no, I use ChatGPT all the time. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I used to use ChatGPT with students 3 years ago, and I never say, let's go to ChatGPT. It's always, here is a room I am sharing with you through Magic School, and just a reminder that I can see everything you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know that I would go back to that Wild West with high school aged people.
Do you know if you heard anything of students themselves saying, oh yeah, but I use ChatGPT or whatever on my own?
Yeah, all the time. They all have ChatGPT. Yeah. Yes, they use it all the time. And we talk about, I'm like, in terms of service, you're not really technically supposed to be using that, but that's been their whole life. They're on all sorts of apps that technically they shouldn't have been using at the ages they weren't using it. So for them, I don't know, they don't pay any attention.
Yeah, well, they've been kind of conditioned to like, here's the bar, just step over it. Like it's been a nudge, wink, wink thing for a long time, which is sad but true. Yeah. I'm just more curious as far as like those kind of skills that you mentioned about not putting PII into the conversation at school. Do they do the same thing with their own version of like, oh, no, this is just for me? There's been obviously a number of examples of people like, lawsuits that's come out that now, like, for example, OpenAI has to share their data with the New York Times, et cetera, like what they think about that, or do they think about it at all?
What do they use it for? If you're if you're using AI, these walled garden AIs in your class, what would a young person be using it for?
They're my students. I don't want to out them, but I will a little bit. They're using other classes where educators aren't talking to them about AI, and they're not using it for good. I don't think they're using the tutor mode on their own. I think they are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they do that for a lot of reasons, right? The academic pressure and time pressure and all of those things, but they're using it in educators' rooms who aren't giving them this sort of tool or aren't talking to them about AI.
So Kate, I want you to talk a little bit about your zones, and I've been recently doing some of the back research behind where she created those from, and there's actual research that using something where you have clear expectations and you're teaching kids about AI is taking that cheating and plagiarism down a whole lot.
Yeah, so I'm rolling out in my district as part of our AI district leadership team's work, which is a team of educators and people from around the state, including Nicole from the DOE and a couple of college professors from the COA and community members. We get together and meet once a week, and we talk about what we want AI to look like in our district, and we work on staying informed, about all the changes that are happening to AI all the time, and then talking about how we're going to roll that out. And so part of that work was last year I created the AI use zones. And that came based off some work that Portland Public Schools had done, and then off of some research that Nicole mentioned about setting those expectations around AI use. And so now our district has these 6 zones of acceptable use. And it's great language to really ground educators and students. So we all have the same language when we're talking about AI in the classroom, and it doesn't place a value on it. So teachers are welcome to be in whatever zone they would like to be in for their assessments. So the zones go from zone 1, which is no AI. What we're doing today is student creation, because we're working on foundational skills, or I need to see what you can do on your own, or we're talking about a sensitive topic. And so we're going to keep the robots out of it and really kind of dig into the humanity of this topic, all the way up to level 6, which is creation with AI to demonstrate your AI literacy skills and your content knowledge. And so everything in between there, from using AI to brainstorm and for feedback and for ideation and all sorts of other uses. But the language really helps keep us all grounded in that. I had a student who I thought maybe had used ChatGPT in a way that I didn't really want them to for an assessment. And I called her in and I said, hey, when I read through this assignment, it really sounds like it was maybe assisted by AI or maybe assisted by another tool. And she was like, yeah, I took all the things you gave us and I took my original writing and I put them into Notebook LM because I had just shown them Notebook LM and how cool it is. And she said, and then, I had it generate a podcast for me and I watched the video and I did all these things. And then I had it take my writing and make me sound more academic. And then I used that. And I was like, oh, wow. That sounds like a really great zone 4 if this were a zone 4 assessment, I said. And then if it were a zone 4 assessment, I would talk about how I still want that writing to sound like you. So I'm glad you used that tool to understand everything. But this was a zone 1. Her whole face, no AI, and her whole face just fell. And she was like, what? And I said, but I think what I'm learning here is I didn't say zone 1 enough. Has to be repeated a lot. And she said, what I'm learning is that I need to pay attention. So we had this understanding pretty quickly because of that language. And I think what could have been a more accusatory conversation, something that felt more punitive, was just very easy because I said, she said, I'm in zone 4. And I said, but this was zone 1. And what do we do to fix that?
So when you, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that this is, right now, we don't have professional development that's widespread ongoing because, it's not available. And the biggest probably reason is time. And so having zones and being able to empower teachers to say this is a zone 1 allows for then those conversations that can end like this versus I wasn't doing it, and that you're showing that you don't trust them, but you've set the expectations, and then the professional development can be ongoing throughout the year, and we can learn, and teachers can move to other zones.
Well, that kind of goes to, I guess, my question, which would be around the professional development, I guess, which is what's the mix? What's the ideal mix of zones and assignments for zones? So you have 6 zones, from zone 1 with just the student up to zone 6 with a lot of AI. When you're thinking about a lesson or thinking about a year or a unit, however you want to chunk out your time, what's the mix of time spent at each zone? Is there an ideal for this, or is it kind of catch as catch can?
That's a great question. It's more, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking more in terms of why am I doing this assessment or why am I doing this activity? And then can I use AI and can my students use AI to break down any barriers or to push their creativity or critical thinking further? So lots of times we are doing, if you walk into my classroom as an English teacher, we have our notebooks out with pens because we are brainstorming or we are, writing to a journal prompt. And that's zone 1. I just want you to get your thoughts out. But if I'm giving a long-term project that is a page of instructions and a rubric, and I want them to pull all of these materials together, I might work in zone 2 with them. So show them how to use Notebook LM as a tool to get organized and to help support their executive functioning skills, and chat with a bot about what those instructions even mean. When they can't access me at 1:00 in the morning, they've decided to do some work. Or zone, it might be appropriate to use zone 4, which is where Grammarly comes in and where we use bots for feedback. Can we do that right before you turn in your final draft, and get feedback and evaluate that feedback and talk about what kind of feedback you're getting and how useful it is. So it's more about breaking down barriers for me and where I can use those tools with my students to do it. And to be honest, when I look at percentage of time, I'm still in zone 1 most of the time. Most of the time in my classroom, if you just walk in randomly, you probably will not see us using AI.
Well, and we talked about this the other day, Kate. You did something with a zone 5 where you had them put their information into a Notebook LM from their discussion, and then they analyzed that. And my question to you was, well, what did you do before, and did it amplify it?
Yeah. This was so fun. But Notebook LM will create podcasts from materials that you give it. And the podcasts are really fun, a little creepy. How does the AI mimic it? My students are like, they sound just like human beings. Like, how does it do that? So I had my students, we had small group conversations over the course of 2 or 3 weeks about poetry that they were reading. And they took notes in Google Docs about what they were talking about. And we took those notes and we put them into Notebook LM and had Notebook LM generate a podcast. And so the podcasters were talking about what my students were talking about. And then I created a Google form for them where they evaluated that podcast. So I attached a rubric to it. And I said, we're evaluating the podcast as the assessment for this part of the poetry unit. And so what did the podcasters get right? What did they get wrong? What did they leave out? And when they left things out, how did that change the message of what your original conversations were? It was a challenge. It was a challenging assignment for them, but it was awesome because when I got all of their responses back, they had thought very clearly and deeply, not only about the podcast, the AI generated podcast, but also back to their original conversations. And then they had to figure out how that all worked together. And for me, that was just like, I don't want to toot my own horn, but that was a really great use of the zone 5.
Sure.
And before, they would have just had their conversations in their small group and turned their notes into me. And that would have been that. And maybe they would have recorded a podcast themselves, that's great too. But I would be their audience. Maybe another class would be their audience, but most likely it's me. And then we're done and we're off to the next thing. So skipping that whole evaluation piece.
And that's a lot of podcasts to listen to.
So here would be so first of all, I am skeptical of AI, but I am not skeptical of anything, Kate, you are doing. I want to make that clear off the top, not just to you, but anyone listening and watching here. I think we've got to have some mad scientist teachers in the lab really experimenting and finding the boundaries of things and trying new things. I think that's absolutely essential. My concern as a skeptic is how many laboratory scientists do we have? How many labs do we have versus kind of solid classroom instruction, right? And I don't mean that lab instruction is not solid. What I'm saying is not everyone's a mad scientist, and not everyone is trained and has the PD to do things at the right level with the right guidelines in this. So my concerns around the zone 1, from my point of view, is I like how you said, like, most of the time you're in zone 1. That makes sense to me. It makes intuitive sense because in education, we're always trying to build up the foundational skills. And my concern is that a tool like AI, it offers a path towards getting a great product. And I do want students to be able to develop some great products, definitely, but I don't want the product to overcome the process. And I want to make sure that what we're really building and spending most of our time on are those foundational skills, especially in the face of, and of course, daily news reports come out about how literacy rates are falling and getting worse. The 32-year low on the NAEP scores there. Like, we have a real issue that really is in the wheelhouse of what we're supposed to be focusing on. And AI might be a fantastic tool, but is it an essential tool in the in the work that we have to do with students and that we are institutionally slipping on. And so my concern is the level of attention AI, is the gravitational pull of AI too great and pulling us away from what's really some disturbing results on some of our primary missions, especially in English. So this would be some of my concern, is that it has a disproportionate attraction and it has a novelty, but that might be disorienting to what we're really supposed to be focused on.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with you there. Reading scores have been falling pre-AI.
Yep.
And I think, there are a lot of reasons for that. Children aren't being read to as much maybe as they were. We have the internet and they're getting phones at earlier ages, and that's rewiring our brains, right? I mean, there are all these reasons, and now we have AI. And so it just seems like it's just amplifying and it's just stacking on top of, and what happens to those skills that traditionally have been really important. I don't have an answer, right?
Me
for
neither.
that. It's a concern in my classroom too. My honors students they're not natural recreational readers. They are not picking up books on the weekend like I used to, because I didn't have the internet when I was their age. And so you put in your mixtape and you pulled out a book, and that was how you spent your Saturday afternoon.
Sure.
They have options that I didn't have, right? And so there are a lot of reasons that skills are slipping. And so when I think about when and why I use AI, it's not necessarily the product, but it's how do I break down barriers? Because now there are so many barriers that exist in my classroom because of these skills that are changing, so that they can still access high level information and still do critical thinking.
That makes a ton of sense. Like, it's my last concern here, or my last kind of the prickly feeling here of like, wait, something feels off, is when we what I've read, there's a lot of the concern. A lot of times people say, and probably I will say today, I will talk about rewiring. It rewires the brain and this kind of thing. And yet the more I read about it, actually, that's kind of a misnomer. It's kind of the wrong way of saying it. It's really about cognitive offloading. What technology does is opens up opportunities for cognitive offloading. And so I guess I just want to be very careful about what we're offloading. And are we offloading something that is kind of a blunt and not very critical and not very transferable skill? And that's okay. Like, that should be done. And then are we offloading something that actually is part of something that should be more integrated, using interleaving or retrieval practice, that actually we don't want to miss out opportunities to kind of leverage what we're doing in the classroom and not use an AI or not use a technology tool, so that we're actually getting students a chance to have a more high leverage classroom experience, and where they're really enriching what they're learning that day with what they've learned in prior days and accessing prior knowledge. So I get a little nervous about that, and even something as like, how much handwriting do you have a student do? And I say this knowing that handwriting is torturous for many students today. But when you start having students do more handwriting, what you realize right away is how much you've been thinking they knew when they're typing into Google Docs, because of that quick grammar check, that quick spelling check. Even as a teacher who's looking for errors, you can get lulled for the errors that you're not seeing. But actually, the students have really degraded punctuation skills, when you see it without any technology. So again, some level of AI in the form of grammar check and whatnot might be essential. It might be an essential job skill. I would totally concede. But while we have them in the educational atmosphere, I want to kind of continually work on those foundational kind of practices and skills as much as possible. So I would be a zone one guy most of the time too.
Yeah. I think it's not one or the other, right? It's how do we build it in so that it works when and where we need it to work. And then we're not using it when and where we don't need to use it. So how do we use it purposefully instead of just pulling it out to be a novelty? How do we use it? How do we decide? How do we stop and say, is this a tool that I want to use for this task, or that I want to have my students use for this task? And also the idea that cognitive offloading is really interesting, because I think that's what happens with all technology. As new technology comes out, maybe it's not always been cognitive offloading. Sometimes it's been physical offloading. And so how do we decide as a society what's okay to offload.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why these conversations are so important, because we will be giving things up with the emergence of this new technology. It's happened every time there has been new technology. We have given things up and we have gotten things that are different on the other end. And so I think it's so important to engage in these conversations, because those of us engaging in these conversations and listening to these conversations and thinking about these conversations, we're the ones who are going to decide what it means to use these tools ethically and responsibly in our society. And that's, I get really passionate about getting people involved in this and learning about AI and trying it out so that you can come to the conversation informed, and being a part of that, because you're right, that things are going to change, right? Like, I don't know if I asked my students what 12 times 12 was, if they would be able to answer it. I certainly could. I had to memorize my times tables,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so for grammar and punctuation, they have a tool that does that now. Is that what it's going to be in 10 years? Nobody really knows how to do it, but the tool corrects it. Might be.
With that, we're going to wrap up this section. Appreciate we'll give Kate the last word. And so we'll kind of bring that into our next episode. We'll be we started with talking about the best use cases we've seen, and kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about the worst use cases and some examples of things that, we've been used, maybe not the way we were thinking they would be. So thank you guys. We'll see you next time.